The wind howled like a feral beast, tearing through the endless white expanse of snow. This was no place for life, yet amidst the biting cold and swirling frost stood a figure, frail, trembling, and heartbreakingly alone. A blind horse, its coat frosted over, exhaled faint wisps of breath into the frozen air. Abandoned to the mercy of a relentless storm, the creature seemed to brace itself for an end that felt inevitable. But even in the most desolate moments, hope has a way of finding the lost. This is the story of Ember, a horse whose spirit refused to be extinguished. The storm raged on, its icy winds piercing through the fragile coat of the blind horse. Ember, frail and trembling, stood motionless as the snow gathered around his legs like chains, weighing him down both physically and emotionally. His ears twitched at every sound, the distant crack of a branch, the eerie whistle of the wind, and then the unmistakable, bone-chilling howl of wolves. Ember's breath came in shallow puffs, each exhale a visible reminder of his fading strength. He had been abandoned, discarded like an unwanted relic, with no one to protect him from the cruel world that surrounded him. His ribs, starkly visible beneath his frost-covered coat, told a story of prolonged hunger and neglect. The rope burns on his neck whispered of a past filled with mistreatment, each scar a silent scream of betrayal. As the storm grew fiercer, Ember's legs began to buckle. The snow piled higher, threatening to consume him entirely. His head hung low, his body trembling as if it carried the weight of the entire storm. In his mind, the fight was over. There was no use resisting the inevitable. Each second felt like an eternity as the storm's ferocity mirrored the loneliness that had engulfed his spirit. But survival instincts die hard. Despite the overwhelming despair, there was a flicker of life within him, a faint, almost imperceptible refusal to surrender. His ears perked up momentarily, catching the distant howl of wolves that seemed to draw closer with each passing minute. The threat of predators loomed large, their presence an added layer of terror in an already unforgiving night. The storm itself seemed to conspire against him. The wind roared louder, pushing him from all sides, as if nature itself sought to erase him from existence. The cold gnawed at his muscles, making even the smallest movement feel like an impossible task. And yet, Ember remained upright, his hooves sinking deeper into the snow with each faltering step he tried to take. For hours, he stood there, his once proud spirit a shadow of what it had been. His mind, clouded by exhaustion and the bitter cold, began to accept the inevitable. With his eyes closed, he braced himself for the end, whether it would come from the merciless cold or the wolves that lurked in the shadows. But the storm, relentless as it was, wasn't the only force at work that night. Sometimes, when the world seems darkest, fate intervenes in the most unexpected ways. Through the raging tempest, a faint light appeared in the distance, two piercing beams that cut through the storm's relentless fury. The headlights of a truck moved slowly, cautiously navigating the icy road. Inside, Claire Bennett gripped the wheel tightly, her knuckles white with tension. She was no stranger to danger, but this storm was unlike anything she had faced before. Claire, a wildlife volunteer with a heart as fierce as the storm, was returning from a nearby reserve where she had delivered much-needed supplies. Her mind was focused on making it home safely when something caught her eye. A dark shape loomed in the swirling snow, barely distinguishable from the chaos around it. She squinted, leaning closer to the windshield. Was it a rock? A fallen tree? Then it moved. Her heart skipped a beat. "It's a horse," she whispered, pulling the truck to a halt. The engine rumbled softly as she grabbed her thick coat and flashlight, stepping out into the freezing night. The wind immediately bit at her face, and the snow stung her skin like needles. But Claire was determined. She approached slowly, each step crunching through the deep snow. The closer she got, the clearer the figure became. A frail horse stood motionless, its head hung low, its body trembling. Her flashlight illuminated the animal's frost-covered coat and the deep rope burns around its neck. "Oh, you poor thing," she murmured, her voice breaking with emotion. Claire crouched a few feet away, careful not to startle the animal. "Hey, boy," she said gently, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. Ember's ears twitched, but he didn't lift his head. He was too weak to react. Claire's heart ached at the sight. This wasn't just a horse. It was a survivor, clinging to the last threads of life. Reaching into her coat pocket, Claire pulled out a small pouch of emergency oats she kept for wildlife rescues. She poured some into her gloved hand and extended it toward Ember. "Come on, buddy. You've got to eat something," she urged. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Ember sniffed the oats and took a tentative bite. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "Good boy," Claire whispered, her breath visible in the icy air. She carefully draped a thick blanket over his shivering body, tucking it securely to provide some warmth. Her mind raced. The storm was intensifying, and leaving the horse here was not an option. But how could she move him alone? Claire scanned the area, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The wolves' howls echoed closer, a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking in the shadows. She needed to act fast. Back at her truck, she retrieved a makeshift harness and some wooden planks to create a ramp. "All right, boy," she said, returning to Ember. "This is going to hurt, but we've got to move." With gentle coaxing and every ounce of strength she had, Claire managed to get Ember to his feet. The horse swayed unsteadily, but he didn't collapse. "That's it," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of relief and determination. Step by agonizing step, she guided him toward the truck, shielding him from the worst of the wind with her own body. As they reached the ramp, Ember hesitated, his hooves scraping against the wood. "You can do this," Claire encouraged, stroking his neck reassuringly. Finally, with a deep, shuddering breath, Ember took the first step. Inch by inch, they made their way into the truck bed. Claire secured him as best as she could, her hands trembling from the cold and exertion. She climbed into the driver's seat, glancing back at the horse through the rearview mirror. "You're safe now," she said softly. "I don't know how, but we're going to get through this." The storm raged on as Claire started the engine, the wolves' howls fading into the distance. Hope had entered the blizzard, and it was determined not to leave without a fight. The blizzard roared as if testing Claire's resolve. With the truck idling behind her, its headlights casting long, ghostly shadows on the snow, Claire tightened the blanket around Ember's shivering body. The horse stood barely upright, his legs quaking as if every ounce of energy had been drained. But there was no turning back now. Each step toward the truck felt like a battle. The wind lashed at Claire's face, numbing her fingers and toes, but she pressed on, her voice a steady anchor in the storm. "You're okay, boy. Just a little further," she murmured, coaxing the horse forward. Ember hesitated, his ears flicking toward the distant howl of wolves that sent shivers down even Claire's spine. The ramp to the truck bed loomed ahead, slick with ice and snow. Claire braced herself, knowing this was the most challenging part of their journey. She guided Ember gently, pulling on the makeshift harness while offering quiet words of encouragement. "I know it hurts," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of exhaustion and determination. "But you have to trust me." Ember took a tentative step onto the wooden planks, his hooves scraping against the slippery surface. He faltered, nearly collapsing, but Claire was there, steadying him with both hands and her sheer will. "You've got this," she whispered, leaning into the harness and pulling with everything she had. The wind howled louder, a relentless force that threatened to undo all her efforts. But Claire didn't give up. Inch by inch, they moved forward, Ember's trembling body a testament to his will to survive. Finally, with a last burst of effort, the horse stepped into the truck bed and collapsed onto the blanket Claire had spread out for him. Claire dropped to her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps, tears mingling with the frost on her cheeks. She reached out to stroke Ember's neck, her voice breaking. "You did it," she said, a note of triumph cutting through her exhaustion. As she secured the horse for the drive, the reality of what they had just accomplished hit her. The storm raged on, but inside the truck, a fragile hope had been kindled. Ember was safe, for now. With one last glance at the wilderness they were leaving behind, Claire climbed into the driver's seat and turned on the heater. The sound of the engine roared to life, drowning out the storm. "We're not done yet," she said softly, her eyes meeting Ember's in the rearview mirror. "But we're going to make it." When Claire finally pulled into the driveway of her secluded cabin, a wave of relief washed over her. The storm had raged on, but she had made it. With Ember in the truck bed, she worked quickly, determined to get him out of the cold and into safety. Her barn was modest, built for wildlife rescues, but it was warm and dry, a stark contrast to the icy wilderness they had just left behind. Claire threw open the barn doors, the warm glow of the single overhead light spilling out into the snowy night. Inside, she had prepared a stall, lining it with fresh straw and laying out water and feed. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Returning to the truck, Claire gently tugged at Ember's harness. "Come on, boy," she said softly. "Just a little more. You're safe now." The horse hesitated, his legs trembling as he stepped down the makeshift ramp. Each step was slow, unsteady, but Ember followed her into the barn, guided by the warmth and the sound of her soothing voice. Once inside, Claire secured him in the stall and draped another blanket over his back. The horse stood motionless, his head hanging low, but his ears twitched as she moved around him. "You've been through so much," she murmured, running a hand gently down his neck. His coat was thin and patchy, the rope burns on his neck and legs raw and inflamed. Claire worked carefully, cleaning his wounds with warm water and antiseptic. Ember flinched at first, but as her touch remained gentle, he began to relax. "That's it," she said encouragingly. "We'll get you back to your old self." She placed a bucket of warm mash in front of him and stepped back, watching intently. For a moment, Ember simply sniffed the food, his dark eyes dull and weary. Then, slowly, he took a cautious bite. Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Good boy," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. Over the next few hours, Claire stayed by his side, her voice low and comforting as she spoke to him. She told him stories of the other animals she had rescued, of the wild horses she had seen running free. Each word seemed to calm him, his trembling subsiding as he stood in the warmth of the barn. By dawn, the storm had passed, and a pale light filtered through the barn's small window. Ember had finished the mash and was resting, his body no longer quaking with cold. Claire smiled as she watched him, her heart swelling with hope. "You're a fighter," she said softly. "We'll get through this together." The days following the storm marked the beginning of a journey that neither Claire nor Ember would ever forget. With each passing day, Ember grew stronger, his steps more sure and deliberate as he ventured out into the paddock. The sight of him standing tall, his once frosted coat regaining its natural sheen, brought tears to Claire's eyes. Every morning, Claire would greet Ember with a soft voice and a warm smile, her hands holding treats or a bucket of fresh mash. "Good morning, handsome," she'd say, her tone light and encouraging. The horse, once hesitant and timid, began to recognize her presence as a source of safety and care. His ears would perk up at the sound of her voice, and his dark eyes seemed to soften as she approached. In the evenings, after the chores were done and the barn was quiet, Claire would sit on a bale of hay near Ember's stall, recounting stories of her past rescues and the wild horses she had admired from afar. As she spoke, Ember would inch closer, his head resting on the edge of the stall as if listening intently. "You've been through so much," she'd say, her voice filled with both sorrow and admiration. "But you're here, and that means everything." One afternoon, as the sun cast a golden glow over the paddock, Claire decided it was time for Ember to stretch his legs. She opened the gate, holding the lead rope loosely as she guided him out. The crisp air carried the scent of pine and earth, a stark contrast to the biting cold of the storm they had endured. Ember hesitated at first, his steps cautious and deliberate. But with Claire by his side, he began to explore, his movements growing more confident with each stride. By the end of the week, Ember was trotting around the paddock, his head held high and his mane catching the breeze. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Where once there had been despair, there was now resilience. Where there had been fear, there was now trust. Claire marveled at his progress, her heart swelling with pride every time he nickered softly in her direction or nudged her shoulder playfully. The bond between them was undeniable, a connection forged in the face of adversity and strengthened by acts of compassion. Their evenings became a cherished routine. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Claire would sit with Ember, her hand gently stroking his coat. She often spoke of her dreams for him, a life of freedom, running with other horses under an open sky. "You deserve the world, Ember," she'd say softly, "and I'll do everything I can to give it to you." With each passing day, Ember's spirit seemed to shine brighter, a testament to his unyielding resilience and Claire's unwavering dedication. Together, they had defied the odds, proving that even in the darkest moments, the light of hope and the strength of love could lead to something extraordinary. The day had finally come when Claire felt Ember was ready for the next chapter of his life. She had spent weeks preparing the reserve, ensuring every detail was perfect for the moment when Ember would finally taste freedom. As she opened the gate to the expansive open space, her heart raced with a mix of pride and apprehension. Would Ember embrace this new beginning? The sun hung high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the lush grass and the distant horizon. Ember stood at the edge of the paddock, his head held high, his mane rippling in the gentle breeze. He seemed to sense the magnitude of the moment, his dark eyes scanning the open field ahead of him. For a moment, he hesitated, as if unsure whether to trust this newfound freedom. Claire stood by his side, her hand resting gently on his neck. "This is your moment, Ember," she said softly. "Go, run, be free." With a deep breath, Ember took his first tentative steps beyond the paddock. His movements were cautious at first, his hooves pressing lightly against the soft earth. But as he ventured further, his stride grew stronger, more confident. And then, with a burst of energy, he broke into a gallop, his powerful legs carrying him across the open field. The sight was breathtaking, pure grace and strength, a testament to the resilience that had carried him through the darkest of days. Claire watched with tears streaming down her face, her heart swelling with emotion. She had dreamed of this moment for so long, and now it was finally here. Ember, once frail and broken, was now a vision of freedom and vitality. The sound of his hooves pounding against the earth echoed in her ears, a rhythm that spoke of triumph and renewal. As Ember reached the far end of the field, he paused, turning to look back at Claire. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that moment, an unspoken connection passed between them. It was a look of gratitude, of understanding, and of love. Claire raised her hand in a small wave, her heart full of pride and a bittersweet sense of farewell. Over the following days, Claire visited Ember often, watching as he adapted to his new environment. He had found a small herd of horses to run with, his natural instincts guiding him to his place among them. The sight of him galloping alongside his companions, his mane flying in the wind, was a constant reminder of the power of second chances. Claire reflected on the journey they had shared, from the heart-wrenching night she had found him in the storm to this moment of liberation. Ember's story was one of resilience, of hope, and of the unbreakable bond between human and animal. It was a testament to the impact of compassion and the importance of never giving up, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. As she stood at the edge of the reserve, watching Ember disappear into the horizon, Claire felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. She had given him a second chance, but in many ways, he had given her one too. He had reminded her of the power of love, of perseverance, and of the extraordinary things that can happen when you believe in the impossible. Ember's story was far from over. It was just beginning, a tale of freedom and joy, of strength and unity. And as Claire turned to leave, she knew that wherever life took them, their bond would remain unbroken, a beacon of hope in an often unforgiving world. As the sun set on the horizon, casting golden hues over the open field, Ember stood among his new herd, his mane flowing freely in the breeze. His journey from the brink of death to this moment of freedom was nothing short of extraordinary. Every step he took now carried the weight of a story, a tale of resilience, love, and second chances. Claire stood at the edge of the reserve, watching him from afar. A soft smile graced her lips, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and bittersweet joy. She had seen him at his lowest, a frail and trembling figure bracing against the storm, and now he was thriving, his spirit unbroken. Her efforts had not only saved a life, but had also brought hope to her own. Saving one life might not change the world, Claire thought, but for Ember, it changed everything. This was the message she wished to share with the world, that no act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted. Every life saved, every soul healed, ripples out into something greater. To those watching Ember's story, Claire's voice carried a heartfelt plea. If this story has moved you, let it inspire you to take action. There are countless animals out there, waiting for a second chance. Support your local rescues, volunteer your time, or donate to causes that save lives. Together, we can create more stories like Ember's, stories of hope and healing. Her final words were a gentle call to action. Like, subscribe, and share this story to honor the spirit of resilience. Let Ember's journey remind us all that even in the darkest times, compassion and determination can light the way.